connecting ESG with value creation looks like, if we take a step back, there are usually 5 levers that we look at when we think about ESG and value creation. How do we solve problems of people and planet and avoid creating problems for people and planet? And how do we do that in a way that generates profit?
What are some of the success factors that you've seen of actual projects of going, don't name names and things, I'm sure there's confidentiality, but we worked on this, we implemented this into this private equity firm, they now do this with every portfolio company, this has created X, Y, and Z. Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Jennifer Wilson, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Rico, a SaaS platform and advisory service delivering support around ESG performance, connecting ESG and value creation. Now, I know there's a lot talked about in ESG world, sustainability and all of those subjects. What I want you to do is I really implore you to listen to this podcast. This will change your perspective on ESG and sustainability and all of that topic around how it can drive genuine value creation. I know that's a term overused in private equity. What Jennifer does here is incredibly clever. She links ESG, data and metrics into EBITDA and revenue performance. There's a reason I've titled this the last ESG podcast you ever need to listen to. So strap in, let's get through it, and please give this the opportunity it deserves, because there is absolute gold in this podcast. Jennifer, if you could give us a 60 to 90 second breakdown of you, please.
Thanks, Alex. So 60 to 90 seconds, I'll try to speak quickly. I mean, basically, there are 2 sides of my background, the business side and then the sustainability side. So prior to starting Rico, which is a sustainability software platform and advisory firm, I was CFO of a group of private companies and spent some time at Bain & Company. So I had experiences in strategy. And then on sustainability, I spent some time researching with a think tank called the Rocky Mountain Institute, headquartered in Colorado, and also at Oxford University here in the UK. So I'm really interested in how do we combine those 2 worlds to build better businesses.
Perfect. So what's one mistake that you see either private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
I think the big thing is stopping at compliance, Alex. So I think that there are a lot of PE firms that, we're all busy, right? We have a lot of priorities. There are pressures right now, obviously, with what's going on with interest rates. There's a lot of pressure on value creation teams to do their job well and get to exit as soon as possible. And it's really easy to see ESG as just this additional thing to do. Okay, well, I've got to produce the report, or I've got to, maybe hire someone that can sit on the fringes and answer questions from our limited partners. But I think that would be probably the top mistake, just in terms of private equity doing what it does best, which is to make the use of limited time and resources to maximize value.
Okay, so if we think about, and you talked there about ESG being a part of the to-do list, not part of the value creation, how are you guys linking that? Because that's important. It's talked about, the term value creation is the most overused term in private equity, bar the word strategy. So how are you guys linking that, and how would you recommend, if I was a managing partner, founder of a private equity firm, I begin to think of it like that rather than a tick box exercise?
It's a really good question. So this is what the difference looks like. If you're in compliance mode, maybe you've hired someone, maybe you haven't, there's an annual report that needs to go out to LPs. It's sort of reactive. Okay, we've got this due diligence questionnaire. We have to answer these questions. There's still quite a few blanks. Look, everybody has a couple blanks on these due diligence questionnaires because they're really long, but it's sort of this this sort of on the back foot. Okay, let's sort of get this out of the way so that we can do a real day job. Now, what connecting ESG with value creation looks like, if we take a step back, there are usually 5 levers that we look at when we think about ESG and value creation. And by the way, we can use the word ESG, sustainability, impact. There are a bunch of different terms out there. We can get into that a little bit later. But really, there are the 5 main levers. First, reducing risk. So if it's sustainability and ESG, governance is part of this. So what would you need to believe to say, okay, we're putting in a cybersecurity risk mitigation process? How much can that save us? It's obviously, for a lot of listeners, they're going to say, well, obviously, cybersecurity is a significant risk. It is a governance risk. And so, there are ways of putting value on reducing that risk, or at least valuing what kind of protection of value we're going to have. So protecting ourselves from downside. The second lever that we think about, and it's a little bit more common in Europe to see some of these tools, but let's get into it. It's reducing cost of capital, Alex. So we see in some cases margin ratchets that are tied to, say, improving your percentage renewable, reducing the amount of carbon emissions you use. Everybody listening to this will want to reduce the cost of financing. And so that's a second lever that we look at. A third is increasing revenue. So this is actually, we get really excited about this at Ricoh. It's thinking about what is the core business model for a portfolio company, and how can ESG almost inspire additional revenue, whether that be entering new markets, new products. Say you want to go to more of a rent versus buy model, and that's great for the customer, but it also reduces your waste. There are lots of really interesting opportunities there. Fourth is, so how do we reduce our costs? So one of the things that you can do is take a look at, okay, well, how do we improve our energy efficiency? So often it's not that, for individuals, it's not that we necessarily want to buy electricity. We just want hot showers and cold beer. To steal an influential energy thinker's line, Amory Lovins, he said, we usually want cold beer from the US, but maybe not so much in the UK. But still, we want the outcome of what energy does for us, not necessarily, to pay for the coal or the electricity. So there's some opportunities to reduce cost. And then finally, the fifth lever that we think about when we look at value creation is really employee engagement. So if we're thinking about improved performance on some of these fronts, we can see better engagement, lower turnover, and that has all sorts of financial value implications for portfolio companies and the firms that are owning them.
It's really interesting. Really interesting. I've never heard it positioned in that way, in order to, you think, oh yeah, we need to reduce energy, and it's kind of like a bit of a bore. But when you start talking about the fact that that's going to increase your EBITDA numbers and linking it to that, I really like the way that you've brought the positioning on there. So if we look at where ESG is now, where ESG has been in relation to private equity, can you talk us through a little bit of that? Because it's definitely more in the forefront now, certainly in Europe, and it's beginning to transition more and more so in the US. But we definitely hear a lot more about this than we did 5 years ago.
I think that's right. 20 years ago, the term was really, founded, 15, 20 years ago. The whole idea was, when we talk about sustainability, sometimes that can sound, to some, it might just sound like financial sustainability. Like, can we keep the lights on? Are we breaking even? To others, it can mean environmental sustainability. So what's our environmental footprint? And I think that was part of the inspiration for saying environmental social governance. It's a broader sweep of non-financial metrics that lead to financial outcomes, essentially. And what we've seen in the past 5 years or so, Alex, is that we've really seen, as you say, ESG and sustainability moving from the periphery to center stage. I think that what's come with that is a variety of opportunities and also risks. So one of the key risks that we've seen is that, look, like it took 700 years for GAAP principles of accounting to really, come to the fore and come together and to be sort of accepted and, rigorous and something that we can use to exchange financial statements and nod our heads and agree that We've taken similar approaches. ESG and sustainability, all of a sudden we had investors saying, okay, well, we need a way of measuring our performance, and limited partners saying, okay, if we are saying that we want to really move towards, say, a low carbon future or, higher diversity, et cetera, we need a way of comparing different GPs, right? And so we've had this scramble as ESG has taken the center stage. We had a bit of an alphabet soup of different acronyms. So anybody who's sort of decided to wade into this world of sustainability, our eyes can glaze over pretty quickly when we talk about the IFRS, ISSB, EDCI, blah, blah, blah. I mean, your eyes are already glazing over, Alex, for listeners who can't see. And so I'm not going to get into that. But the whole point is there became this sort of alphabet soup of acronyms. And investors were left thinking, okay, well, what do I do with this? What does this actually mean for our core investment cycle, the services that we provide to LPs and portfolio companies? And we've seen maybe in the past year a bit of maturity coming to the fore. So you have some voluntary standards that have merged with regulatory standards. So there are fewer things to look at and more agreement in terms of, okay, well, if I want to talk about climate change, for example, okay, I'm going to use this one framework that links to the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, the TCFD. This is how I'm going to do it. So there's a little bit more agreement there. I think we're also getting more sophisticated within private equity on what do we mean by ESG or sustainability in practice, basically. And so what we saw in 2021 was a lot of folks on LinkedIn saying, I'm a sustainability expert, and the year prior they were in marketing, right? And so I'm sure you're seeing this, Alex, in terms of search, that increasingly, especially in order to drive some of these agendas, it's one thing to set the initial plan, but then to come back to it year after year and continue to improve. There is sort of subject matter expertise that's required, and we're starting to see that come to the fore in the industry. So those are some of the trends in terms of where we are today. I think the final one that I point out is this whole greenwashing backlash. In a way, there's been a greenwashing backlash paired with almost a backlash against ESG in general. And we have quite a few listeners from the US, so I really want to speak to them on this podcast, because at Rico, we're really focused on being values agnostic. And I'm sure it's the same for you, Alex. So we're much more interested in outcomes than sort of how you get there. So whether you're reducing your energy to reduce your cost, or you're reducing your energy to reduce, your carbon emissions, we don't really care. Let's roll up our sleeves and do that together. But the point is that this whole greenwashing backlash came to the fore, I think, not because funds were trying to do the wrong thing. It's just things were moving really quickly. We had, from 2021 to 2022, it went from really a side conversation to everybody's got to have an ESG strategy. And of course, if you're rushing things and you don't necessarily have the technical expertise to know how to underpin an assertion like sustainable strategy or sustainable fund, then you're going to set yourself up for, some risk there. And so what we saw last year especially was, okay, the EU regulators said, no, we're going to get really clear in terms of what sustainability means with regulation, including the SFDR. Now, we're not going to get into detail on regulation unless you'd really like to, Alex. My guess is that listeners just want sort of high level view. The SEC is talking about it in the US. There's some interesting regulation coming out of California. Anyway, the point is that there was a bit of a backlash against, we're bandying around this word sustainability, but what does it really mean? And then on the other side, there's this question of, now hold on, shareholders matter too. We can't get carried away looking at all these non-financial factors and not thinking about what are the outcomes for our shareholders. Ultimately, we're fiduciaries. And I think the through line really, to make sense of all of this and where we are today, is that, let's come back to our fiduciary duty. Absolutely. And as we outlined earlier in this conversation, there are many ways to tie sustainability to core value creation. Look, our economies, our developed economies, developing economies are increasingly becoming intangible. It's a trend that's, going in one direction. And so in some cases, it's not as easy as saying, okay, we've reduced our energy costs. Sometimes there's intangible stuff like brand or engagement of talent, or we have a greater throughput on our IP generation process and innovation process. But still, the point is focusing on what's our fiduciary duty. Yes, we have sustainability that's part of that, or ESG that's part of that, but let's always come back to we're building better businesses. And look, PE is really well placed for this stuff because with a timeline of say, 4, 5, 6 years, you can get a lot done. And the ROI on some of these initiatives can really start to bear fruit. Or you can have the exit explanation sort of sharing, okay, this is what we've invested, this is how much it's returned thus far, and this is how much further return you're going to see for your egg before you exit next. And so I think that that's really the through line for all of this. And then the second principle would be, it's really over deliver and under promise. I think that it's common sense for a lot of people who will be listening to this, really wanting to demonstrate through action. So if we say that we have a particular target, having the backup for that. We'd never go to an investment committee meeting and not have backup for an assertion on an investment thesis. So just treating our sustainability plans that we communicate publicly with that same level of rigor, which investors are really good at. I think that keeps us, focused on, okay, sustainability results while keeping our fiduciary responsibilities in mind and keeping ourselves out of this greenwashing risk at the same time.
I think it's an interesting balance you've got there of we recognize that this has to happen. We also recognize that we're here to, in essence, make money, whether that be for ourselves, our LPs, etc. from there. And I think that's a great way of operating. Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of our long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast. So if let's say I know the US is lagging with regards to the enforcement of ESG from the regulatory basis. But if I'm sitting here going, okay, I've heard enough about it, I want to do something about it, where does somebody start to begin to either implement these strategies or begin to upgrade them to create the kind of impetus around we need to give this some consideration? Where's your kind of advisory side of your business? Where do you start to say, let's look here? And I'm going to guess it's going to be something that obviously funds the bottom top line of something in order to gain interest, I would guess.
It's a really great question. So we tend to start with what's the vision. So it's very similar to any strategic process. What's the vision for the fund? Where do the managing partners want to go? How is that different from competitors? And how does sustainability and broader purpose fit into that? So it's actually really interesting. So I host a podcast as well. It's a bit meta, Alex, that we're doing this. I'm loving it. I host a podcast as well, and there was an amazing interviewee named Dr. Colin Mayer, and he's sort of the guy that talks about purpose. And it's funny because I've seen World Economic Forum documents come out and say, okay, there are all of these standards for different aspects of sustainability, and then there's just Colin Mayer's name next to purpose. Like that's how profound he is on this particular topic, and I think he's profound because he's very much simplifies, what purpose is about. It's so how do we solve problems of people and planet and avoid creating problems for people and planet? And it is, and how do we profit from that? How do we do that profit in a way that generates profit, right? And so, and a lot of funds will already have this. Many portfolio companies also have this. So it's talking about, so what's the bold ambition for the competition, your competitive position overall for the fund? What's the purpose, and how does sustainability sort of tie into that initially? And then it's thinking about, okay, well, what's really material given the focus for the fund? So if you're focusing on a specific industry or industries, having a sense of, okay, well, what are the material areas, not just from a compliance perspective? Yes, we need to comply. We're not going to help you with a strategy that then you have to scramble to comply with regulation in a couple of years' time. No, yeah, of course we have to comply. But if we look at the market landscape and we understand what the risks are and the opportunities and what our competitors are doing, what are the areas where we can really stand out and be industry leaders? And how do we boil that down into essentially a sustainability framework, saying, just like you would in any kind of strategy, here are the things where we're really going to punch above our weight, and then roll that into the end-to-end investment cycle. In some cases, depending on the strategy for a particular fund, they're going to be more heavily focused on, due diligence to begin with, or sort of the value creation or operational piece. But we really recommend taking a look at, okay, well, if you want to outperform on employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and energy efficiency, then let's roll that through the entire sort of cycle of investment, from due diligence, from prospecting and sourcing all the way through to exit. But it really starts with the core of the why, and that can be sort of more of the social and environmental reasons why, or it can be financial and competitive reasons. I like to fuse those together. So that would be the sort of starting point. We can get into more detail and double click on any aspect of that and data collection and what to do with data, but that would be the starting point, Alex.
I think if I summarize, and obviously I'm no ESG expert, certainly not, but if we look at what, as a private equity firm, you've got the opportunity here to differentiate. You've got the opportunity here to see it in the landscape and the lens that you see it, which is, how do we basically tick both boxes? We keep our investors happy and we keep ESG, but then taking it to the point where it's no longer a box, it's actually, how do we create value creation around this? And how do we use this as, here's what you may already be doing some of these already as a private equity firm. It's just, how do we use this as a lens for this? And LPs will obviously be happy about that. And then utilizing this as an implementation of actually going, well, actually, this is also good for the planet. It's also good for our pockets. And it's also good from a communication perspective of, we take serious consideration from this. But it's not just a basis of, yes, we do it because we have to. We do it because it actually drives return on investment.
I think that's right. I mean, I think there are three main dimensions of this. The first is to think about, I mean, many have said that sustainability is sort of what technology or, tech was, 20 years ago. It was like, oh, is that going to impact our business? Maybe not our business. And now like digital and technology is part of everybody's business, right? And sustainability, you could argue if it's to the same extent, that doesn't really matter. But I do think that sustainability is fundamentally shaping our planet, and therefore, the markets that we operate in. And so I think seeing sustainability as a dimension of transformation is sort of the first step. And that can really change the conversation. It's less, okay, we need a responsible investment policy, let's post something, or the LPs want to see XYZ. No, it's more, okay, well, this isn't going away, at least some of the physical elements, the employee expectations. There are some trends. It's basically a bunch of disruptive trends that we've bunched together to say, they sort of fall in line with environmental, social, and governance areas. and to sort of treat it that way in a strategic lens. So that's the first point. The second point is to really bring the team into that process, right? So we've had deal teams that we've spoken to where maybe the first call, it's sort of, they're looking at us like, oh, you're slowing us down. We haven't slept enough. And all the things, because they work extremely hard. It's amazing. And, they've created 100 slides the day before and they're looking at us like, wait, you want to talk about diversity? But then we figure out, okay, well, what's the investment thesis here? Oh, actually, diversity could really help us, sell in this payments environment. We're not targeting, female buyers and all, and okay, maybe we need more representation in the executive to understand these buyers and et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, the second call they have with us, they come, it's really neat to see, they come and they're just basically using their investment brains and wrapping that sort of capability around ESG. And they tend to come on second and third calls with us, prepared and really ready to like hash it out. Oh, I was thinking that actually there's this opportunity to improve renewable energy usage, and maybe we could reduce financing. And here's the estimate. Let's put that in the value creation plan as a lever. And it really is. So that, second point is really, engaging your team. And I'd say that the third piece is, it's like anything new. If you're wanting to engage your team and see new behaviors or skills, yes, it's basically any kind of new skill development. So it's got to come from the top. Managing partners need to care about this stuff. There's got to be, training for the deal teams. It's got to be, part of the conversation when you're doing a review with your team. There's got to be not just sort of the box ticking exercise, but really, substantive debate in the investment committee on some of the ESG elements. That comes with time, but it's all of the things that you would expect if you're trying to instill new skills in a team. Even if, say, it's 10 years ago and okay, we're really trying to take our HR and talent capabilities to the next level. How do we do that? What skills do we need? And how do we train our deal teams to be great board members when it comes to talent? Or so if you see what I mean, it starts with sort of a strategic lens, but then it's really engaging people so that they make decisions while incorporating additional information.
It's making it a new skill, a new area of a business, and a new part of the fundamentals, which isn't oh God, we have to do this, which probably everything that's created change. Oh, we've got to bring technology and we need somebody to look at it. The CTO role, which is now filtering into private equity firms, certainly the larger businesses, recognizing that the managing partner probably doesn't have to deal with the tech issues, but also doesn't want to try and stay ahead of the fact that there's something better out here. We can do better investor relations reportings. We can do better deal origination through a platform, through this, through that, etc. And it's being able to go, right, this is now part of what we need to be doing and what we need to be adapting in. Something else will come out in the future and that'll be the main headline, just like it was when we realized that actually we need to focus on talent, and just dumping on HR hasn't really particularly worked, and the reshuffle and reorganization that firms have had to do to drive that. And then investors then going, actually, we need to be talent experts because I'm doing the interviewing and selection and I've never been trained in interviewing ever in my life. I'm a vice president, I'm a principal, and I have no idea technically what I'm doing and I have no training, but I'm going to choose this chief executive because I liked the cut of their jib. It's that kind of fundamentals to come into the business to then have, right, this is just part of our investment process from start right through to finish.
Exactly. Businesses are just groups of people who make decisions, and the quality of those decisions, how rapid those decisions are, make all the difference in the performance, at a firm level as a fund or within portfolio companies. And this is just about how do we improve the pace and the quality of decisions we make in relation to additional information. And what I would say, and this comes back to our conversation earlier around this greenwashing trend, I'd say that it's been really interesting to see that where there's been sort of a backlash against ESG, we've heard from a lot of investors that, it's not that they're really bought into climate change necessarily, but they just they're investors and they tend not to want less data. They might ignore or say, okay, some data, they're not going to go by, this data necessarily, but they want more information. And it's because they want to make better decisions. So it's really a no-brainer. But in order to go from information to insight and improve decisions, there is an upskilling process that's required, not unlike, as you point out, on the talent front. There are a lot of sort of blind spots to anybody new to those types of skill sets. Sustainability is no different.
What's some of the projects, your firm's obviously advising, has a SaaS platform and offering services with regards to ESG, sustainability, and all the other terms that get thrown under that. What are some of the success factors that you've seen of actual projects of going, don't name names and things, I'm sure there's confidentiality, but we worked on this, we implemented this into this private equity firm, they now do this with every portfolio company, this has created X, Y, and Z. Because you seem very focused on the outcomes and actually the benefits that benefit all, rather than the boxes that a regulator has brought on us. So just to help enthuse that even further, what's some of those examples that you've worked with firms on and achieved?
Yeah, so for example, one of the things, it is really hard to manage what you can't measure. So with one of the funds that we work with, they had several portfolio companies that did not measure carbon emissions, energy, renewable energy, and they didn't have all of their data in one place in terms of percentage diversity metrics. And these are sort of like typical metrics that you would see, but we also go a little bit further. So they didn't have a clear line of sight into the quality of the employee surveys that were being undertaken, or the customer surveys, and the cybersecurity risk, the maturity. They also turning their minds to like how mature are our boards, right? So what if we want to be the top quartile in terms of governance? What does that actually look like? Okay. And so an example, this is sort of across the board, and then we can get into a Portco example. But across the board, it was helping them to really really accelerate. How do we get that data into one place using their eco platform, and using our board maturity assessment and cybersecurity. Look, we're not cyber experts, but we do draw from the best standards out there to ensure that all of your portfolio companies are getting the same questions. And it can raise some interesting red flags from time to time. And so getting all of their information into one place, I'd say, examples of levers would be, for value, I should say, would be, well, in one portfolio company, we took a look at their energy usage and identified that they had significant operations in states in the US where they could move to community solar projects and reduce in the order of magnitude of 10% electricity costs. And the payback, it's a longer time horizon, but the payback was in the millions of dollars over the coming 10 years. And so very quickly, if you do that with one portco, very quickly, if you don't consider some of the other things that I'll go through in a second, we tend to return the cost of our fees by a multiple of 5 to 10. And that's just because all you have to do is find a couple companies. Not every company is going to necessarily have low-hanging fruit like this, but usually there's one or two. Another would be really getting a clear picture of the diversity on boards and seeing an opportunity for improving diversity of thought and being able to engage on, okay, well, currently the bottom quartile is looking extremely homogenous. And, what does that mean in terms of the markets that we want to pursue? We're trying to grow, we're trying to do bolt-ons, et cetera. We need to have better board maturity and, skills matrices. Why don't we pull diversity into that? So that actually created this really great. So for those listeners that aren't familiar with board skills matrices, it's basically you break down, here are the most important things for our board to be experts on in order for us to be successful in our market. So you'll break down whether it's geographical expertise, or maybe they have expertise with on the buy side, so that particular product or service, you really understand like what customers are going to be thinking. Maybe they have technology expertise, etc. We were able to, looking at the diversity side, also take a look at board maturity and the skills matrix as a way of not just pulling in, say, gender diversity, but really becoming much more structured in terms of how do we ensure that the right people are around the boardroom table when decisions are being made, so that we aren't disrupted by really critical trends in the market. So those would be some of the examples that I would share. We could go further, but I mean, this probably isn't a sales pitch opportunity. It's more just giving concrete examples. But I'd say, look, you're collecting information that is non-financial with really material implications. And so why not use it? You don't just have to focus on carbon emissions. You can also look at cybersecurity. Do they have the right policies? You can look at how are their customers happy? This is an opportunity really to take a look at the leading indicators for these businesses. And as soon as you do that, I mean, who doesn't want to look at that scorecard, right? Like, who doesn't want to look at the scorecard and have a summary of all of their portfolio companies and have a sense of, are the customers happy? Where do we need to focus? Where are employees unhappy? And LPs take a look at that and they say, okay, it's clear that they're not just delivering this as an answer to our due diligence questionnaire. We can see that this is, almost like a guiding star for this particular fund in terms of their sustainability performance, and they use it basically. And I would think that LPs would not just want to see that there are policies in place, but that they actually influence how people in an organization are making decisions.
No, that's incredibly well put. So Raw Selection is built on completing the difficult searches, the searches that the big strat firms have struggled with, and we've built our track record and our basis on working with lower and middle market private equity firms across Europe and North America on the searches for the firm and for the portfolio companies that other firms have been incapable of completing. So if you're exploring a new opportunity, either within a private equity firm or a portfolio C-suite executive in a peer-backed setting, please do reach out to us at Raw Selection. We'd love to support you in securing your next role within the private equity industry. Alongside the podcast, we're passionate about giving back to the industry and giving people information that they can run and utilize. One thing we do regularly every year is we run salary reports on accurate and live data of people that we've interviewed and people that have shared their information with us. So if you're looking to compare your current compensation or your compensation for your next hire in your private equity firm or portfolio company, then please check out our YouTube channel and see the playlist of salary surveys. So we've talked a lot about where we're at the moment with regards to ESG, but not so much what's coming. If you can put your, it might be a UK reference, but Mystic Meg type hat on, and what do we envisage seeing? What's some of the maybe warnings for private equity firms that aren't adopting this, but also what's some of the opportunities for private equity firms that are to maximize what we're going to see from an ESG as 5 years, as you say, it's still in its early stages, and we're still in its early stages of adaptation.
I think it's so interesting. I mean, I think let's start with opportunities. I find that, when we're talking to clients or potential clients, it starts as a conversation about, okay, well, how do we incorporate ESG into an investment thesis that doesn't have too much to do with sustainability? But now increasingly, ESG is part of the prospecting process. So if we look at most industries and segments of industries, there's a sustainability play. So I think that we're going to see really diving into, okay, what does closed loop, sort of cradle to cradle life cycle assessment, meaning, using material to create a product and then taking it back at the end of the use for a particular product. How do we use that as a lens for looking at, say, packaging for particular consumer goods, for packaging, for products that are distributed, for, there are a variety, or renewable energy. So how do we, think about, okay, energy storage, energy distribution, renewable energy. There are so many opportunities as you look at really the majority of the industries out there to have a sustainability play. And what we're seeing already is that investors that are really switched on are using this lens as just a disruptive trend. And it's part of their investment thesis. They take a look at, basically it's like a 2x2 in consulting terminology. So imagine 4 boxes. On the x-axis, you're looking at, what's the current performance in terms of sustainability, and on the y-axis, it's how easy is performance to change, basically. And you're looking for organizations, if you're looking to add value, maybe they have low performance, that's okay. But if you can improve the performance, then there's really a value creation opportunity there. And so I would say that those trends around the opportunities, so prospecting, really looking at, okay, how can we use sustainability as a lens for, a winning strategy and a winning investment thesis, an area that I want to play, or how do I look at the likelihood that I can actually improve this company if I am buying it out or taking a minority stake. I think that increasingly we're going to see, for those who are really at the forefront of sustainability, we're going to increasingly see sustainability and impact owned by the wider team. I think that, yes, ESG teams are required. There's a lot of sort of heavy lifting around some pieces like data, sharing best practice, educating, teams, et cetera. Yes, there's the need for ESG professionals. It is technical, as we were discussing earlier. But at the same time, I think that increasingly everybody's going to have, a toolkit that includes sustainability. And I do think that although, there will probably be moments where we still have these conversations about values and why are we doing this, I think increasingly the business opportunity will resolve some of those, debates, not all of them. The reality is that, look, in our business at Ricoh, there are things that we do that do not help with the short-term profitability of Ricoh. And may lead to something intangible like happier employees, et cetera. And it is like, we help clients put a number on that, but it's never perfect. Mm-hmm. Just like, valuing, if you're talking to an accountant that's trying to put the value on your latest patent, it's not perfect, but we know that there is value there. And so what I would say is that there's a ton of opportunity to focus on this stuff. I'm not going to say that it's, a magic bullet and that everything that you do on sustainability is going to improve your financial performance. It's just not, it's not. There's some things that are probably going to be neutral, or, it's going to be hard to put an exact number on it. But look, in business, we do that all the time. Those who believe in brands, or those who believe in building IP, et cetera, it's not a perfect science. But I think that moving forward, when it comes to sustainability, we'll be treating it more like just a dimension of business rather than this new shiny thing that's, complicated, and some people believe in it and others don't.
Makes a lot of sense. It's, I suppose it all stems around initially gathering that data, and whether that data is valuable is in the choices that you make, and whether it be a customer satisfaction survey, if it all comes back good, at least if it's an employee survey, then it comes back and and it's about that understanding of that and implementation. But it all comes down to initially just gathering that data, gathering that information, of which is what every private equity investor is all about. If I look at every podcast I've done, that we can't have gone through one without saying we need data, usually data, this is American, but we need data, we need information to be able to make effective decisions and drive that. And this sustainability lens is pushing us down that route. And who knows what might bring because of it, to support us with measuring more cultural basis. If we're looking at employees, which, I've had one podcast with Thayer, I think it was Thayer, I can't remember which firm it was, but that had a model around their culture and how they built that. And they've done that because they've measured. And that's coming in from a sustainability lens. And you're like, well, how is cultural aspects sustainable? I mean, who cares? It's improving businesses and it's driving the right outcomes and improving things. And if you can roll this out and create as playbooks, roll it into every portfolio company. And also, as a lot of private equity firms forget, you also need this in your private equity firm, not just in your portfolio companies. God, the amount of conversations I have, and I'm like, why the hell don't you have it there? You've got a really good talent acquisition process in your portfolio company. When it comes to your private equity firm, you've got very little. Why? But that's a different story. But it's about getting the data and then being able to interpret that and utilize it. And it's just called ESG and sustainability and everything else that it comes under the lens of.
I think that's spot on. And as with anything, strategy. So going back to my time at Bain & Company, I was very fortunate to work there and learned a lot from my colleagues. And they talk about strategy being the allocation of scarce resources for competitive advantage, basically. And I think that one of the things that data can help with, well, there are two levels of utilizing scarce resources. First, don't try to collect all the data. Don't try to collect 300 KPIs because then you're not really focusing on anything. And then the second is, how do you allocate scarce resources to move the needle on a couple of them and get really clear? So one of the things that we do, and maybe some members of the audience will do, is just having an annual process for taking a look and playing back the data to portfolio companies. So what can happen is, okay, we're doing this for LPs. Remember, we started this conversation. Don't stop at compliance, right? Okay, we've got the data for LPs. Let's report it up. And the portcos that maybe are going through a restructuring, or they have some, value creation initiatives that they're adopting because you've suggested them, or they've co-created them with the fund, they don't hear anything back after they pull together this data, and they've been busy and it's been hard. And so then the next year they're sort of like, okay, well, then, it doesn't really matter. We didn't hear anything back. It's really important, I think, and this actually I'm really passionate about. To me, that makes no sense. What private equity is really good at is, taking a couple things, pulling in the data required, getting that investment thesis really clear, and then just driving results. And it doesn't make any sense to me, to waste time and money just pulling. I know that we have to raise funds. Yes, that is a purpose, but it's basically doing 95% of the work and getting a fraction of the value from the process. Why don't we just do the extra 5% of work collectively? If you look at the number of hours and put into data collection, look, we're doing APIs and all of these kinds of things to make data collection easier, but still it takes the bulk of the time, and play that information back. So if it's talent that you're trying to move the needle on, play that information back to the portfolio companies that these were your results. Here's how you stacked up against benchmarks. And really add value through that sort of method. Do an action planning session with them. And if you don't have, we do action planning sessions all the time. I mean, either do it in-house or ask if they already have an action plan, pull their action plan into some sort of governance process. So usually we recommend, you're already at board meetings, driving the agenda. And so why not ensure that ESG and this action plan and the data that you asked to be collected why not ensure that that's presented at least once a year? And then make sure to ask questions about, well, how are the targets going? And so I think that it's about, you're right, Alex, it's about making sure that you have the appropriate data, but it's collecting the right data so that we're not so overwhelmed with the results that, it just becomes a blur of too many statistics. And then it's also pulling the data into structures so that we can contextualize them. We have a sense of what, low, medium, high performance looks like that's really appropriate for the particular portfolio company's size, maturity, industry, and that ties into a conversation where they get the sense, oh, wow, the board cares about this. And I'll tell you that in the portfolio companies where boards are talking about sort of asking for the action plan and where they ask at least 2 questions, it doesn't have to be a long conversation, it totally transforms the action planning process and the data collection process, because they can see, oh, this is actually a priority. This actually, if it's talent that we're talking about, like, oh wow, okay, they not only ask, do we have an employee engagement survey, or they not only ask that we do a new talent management course, but they want to see the results. So I'm on the hook for the results. And then that changes everything. And the orientation, rather than being sort of data and collecting data for data's sake, it's really about performance. And that's what private equity is really good at. So right now, to me, the way ESG is run, for the most part, not everybody, there are leaders out there, but for the most part, if we're not thinking about action and outcomes, we're just thinking about data. To me, that doesn't make any sense, even though we have a data platform. The point is to make that part painless and to get to the so what, because that's what ultimately allows us to improve businesses, improve valuations, improve outcomes for people and planet, et cetera.
It's certainly seeing it as an opportunity rather than a threat, and that certainly seems to be the general consensus of this conversation and driving that. So I appreciate the insight, certainly into that. So moving away from a little bit from ESG, unless you bring us back by recommendation of influences, but what do you read, what do you watch, what do you listen to? Obviously, your own podcast. I'm sure we'd like to hear a little bit more about that you recommend that others check out.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that one of my favorite newsletters that I read is the Financial Times Moral Money newsletter. It was founded by a favorite Financial Times a journalist, Gillian Tett. She is a anthropologist, as well as, she basically thinks differently, and she predicted the financial crisis before anyone else in 2007, 2008, wrote a book called Fool's Gold about it. And then before the sweep of ESG sort of hysteria struck in 2021, she started Moral Money. So she was able to see this trend before most of us. And I think what I really like about the newsletter is it's the Financial Times, so it's very much focused on markets and business, but they actually they have an amazing coverage of renewable energy, environmental policy, these kinds of pieces. I think they really show that this stuff is material to business, and they would exceed reporting. They're sort of like Bloomberg in the US. They cover green things because it's financially material. I'd say in terms of book recommendations, I would like, this sounds really, I sort of hesitate to do this because it is linking to my podcast, Future and Sound, but we did a compilation in the past couple of weeks of books that have been recommended on the Future and Sound. Like usually I finish the podcast with, what would you recommend? Like, I love your question, Alex. Maybe I need to update my question to what do you read and listen to? Because I think that's really smart. But usually I ask, what book has most shaped your lens? And for anybody who's listening to this and thinking, I would like to, pick up a book and get smart on sustainability, I'm intrigued by this kind of stuff. It's basically recommendations from, Gillian Tett was on the podcast, from the Financial Times, Alex Edmonds, who's a business professor at London Business School and has written some great books on sustainability. Anyway, they go through the books that have really influenced them. And so, you have 50 options to choose from. And it's a really good starting point, probably better than me going through all the books that have influenced my view. I'd really recommend checking that out.
Very much appreciate that. And if anybody wants to reach out, Jennifer, post this podcast, how best do they get in touch, please?
Yeah, so I can be found at re.co.com. There's contact information there. The podcast is Future and Sound. If you look that up, basically anywhere you get your podcast, you should be able to find it.
Perfect. Well, Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us. You've given us a really, for me definitely a unique insight into ESG and into how it can be applied into private equity, into portfolio companies, and a bit of a refreshing difference for that. So thank you very much for sharing all of that you have done.
Thank you, Alex.
And as always, thank you very much to everybody listening. Should you ever need support with private equity professionals or portfolio executive hiring, please do reach out to us, at Raw Selection. If you've not already, please do subscribe to the podcast and you'll be notified of the next podcast, which now comes out every single week. So till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for listening.